The winter wind howled through the pine trees. The snow fell relentlessly, 1 meter, 2 meters, then taller than a man. In a wooden hut on the verge of collapse, a group of people sat in silence. No food, no hope, no escape. A mother cradled her growing child. A man stared at a dying fire, and in the corner, someone stared at a frozen body. Not with sadness, not with reverence, but with a terrible question. How much longer can we last? Days passed. Hunger turned to torture, torment turned to madness. And amidst the frozen mountains, the boundaries between humanity and the instinct for survival began to disappear. What was really happening here? How did an ordinary family become trapped in one of the most horrific tragedies in American history? And why are their names still spoken nearly 2 centuries later? This is a story of hope, despair, and decisions no human being ever wants to face. In 1846, hundreds of thousands of Americans dreamed of a new life in the West, more land, greater opportunity, a brighter future. Among them were dozens of men, women, and children who joined a caravan of migrants. They left their homes. They sold their possessions. They said goodbye to their families, all for one goal: reaching California. They believed the journey would bring happiness. They believed the path they chose would shorten their time. They believed they had made the right decision. They were wrong. That mistake would change everything. What began as a hopeful journey would turn into an unimaginable nightmare. A tragedy that would leave the world asking, how far are humans willing to go to survive? Spring 1846, the group set out with optimism. The wagons moved slowly across the vast American plains. Children played. Adults joked. They imagined a new home waiting in California. But the journey west was no romantic adventure. It was a cruel ordeal.
Each day brought new challenges: searing heat, sickness, exhaustion, dead animals, dwindling supplies. Nevertheless, they pressed on. Then a seemingly simple decision came: a shortcut. An alternative route promised to be quicker, safer, more efficient. Many in the group hesitated.
But hope often leads people to ignore warnings. They chose to take that path. That decision was the beginning of disaster. The promised path turned out to be nearly impassable. They would have to cut down trees, making their own way, pushing a wagon through uncharted terrain. Days turned into weeks. Time wasted away. Supplies dwindled. The animals grew exhausted. Some died on the journey. Others were slaughtered for food. Fear began to set in. But they had come too far to turn back. When they finally reached the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains, winter had come sooner than expected. The sky darkened, the air grew cold, and snow began to fall. At first, just a thin layer, then it grew thicker and thicker and thicker,
until the road before them disappeared completely. They were trapped. There was no way forward. There was no way back. Only white mountains stretching in all directions. The first days were filled with hope. They believed help would come. They believed the storm would pass. They believed they could survive. But nature paid no attention to human expectations. Food supplies ran out. Cattle were gone. Horses were gone. Dogs were gone. Bones were crushed.
Anything edible became valuable. Famine began to change people. Children cried all night. Mothers couldn't afford to feed themselves. Fathers watched their families slowly weaken. Every morning, someone didn't wake up. Every morning, there was a new body. And each death brought a question that became increasingly difficult to avoid.
What if there was nothing left to eat? What if help never came? It was at that point that this tragedy turned into something far darker. Something that still sends shivers down my spine to this day. Some people began to consider things they had never considered before. Things that went against morals. With religion, with humanity, but power. Hunger doesn't care about principles. Hunger doesn't care about shame, but hunger knows only one goal: survival.
And amidst the endless snows of the Sierra Nevada, some of them made a decision that would haunt history forever. Despair doesn't come all at once. It comes slowly, like snow piling up on a hut's roof, bit by bit, day by day, until finally everything collapses. In this isolated camp in the Sierra Nevada mountains, time seems to stand still. The sun still rises, but the sun still sets. But life seems to disappear. Every morning begins with the same question: is there still food? And almost every morning, the answer gets worse.
The children begin to lose weight drastically. Their once colorful faces turn pale. Their eyes look sunken. Their bodies are too weak to play, too weak even to cry. For the parents, the greatest suffering isn't their own hunger. It's watching their children slowly disappear before their eyes. Some mothers try to hide their fear. They smile. They hug their children. They lie. Food will be here soon. Help will be here. Everything will be fine.
But deep inside, they were no longer so sure. Outside the hut, storm after storm continued to batter. The snow fell relentlessly. The path to California had been buried. The path back east was also impassable. They were truly trapped, and supplies were running out. All that remained were choices no one ever wanted to face. Some began eating hardened cowhide. The hide was boiled for hours.
Then chewed like rubber, it had almost no taste. It had very little nutritional value, but at least it gave the illusion of eating. Others boiled bones, scraped away any remaining tissue, gathering whatever they could stomach. But the human body has its limits, and that limit was fast approaching. In early December, some members of the group realized a terrible thing. If they continued to wait here, everyone would die.
So, a plan was born. A nearly impossible plan. A group of volunteers would attempt to break through the mountains on foot. They would seek help or die along the way. There was no third option. The group would become known in history as Forlorn Hope. A hope that was almost lost. A name that perfectly suited their fate. 17 people were chosen. Men, women,
and a few teenagers. They wore the clothes they had, made makeshift snowshoes, take what little food they had left. Then they left camp, leaving their families, leaving their children, leaving the possibility that they would never return. The first steps felt hopeful, but hope soon turned to agony. Snow reached their chests. The wind cut through their skin like knives.
Every step took incredible effort. They walked for hours, sometimes all day, just to cover a very short distance. Nighttime was worse, much worse. The temperature dropped drastically. Their bodies froze. They slept huddled together, trying to maintain some warmth. But warmth was increasingly elusive. Then the first death came. A member of the group fell, unable to continue.
His body was too weak. Hunger had taken its toll. They tried to help, tried to lift him, tried to encourage him. But finally, they had to accept the reality. He wouldn't survive. The group kept moving, leaving one body behind in the sea of Wheater snow. Not long afterward, another victim appeared. Denanotir. Andanotir.
Death became part of the journey. Something terrifying. But slowly it began to feel normal because they didn't have the luxury of mourning. They only had the energy to survive. Days passed. The food was completely gone. There was nothing left to eat. No animals, no plants, nothing, just snow. Endless snow.
Hunger had now turned into physical torture. Their stomachs felt like they were on fire. Their heads spun. Their bodies weakened. Some began hallucinating. They saw food that wasn't there. They heard voices that weren't real. They talked to themselves. They lost their way, and finally, the conversation they had been avoiding emerged. No one wanted to say it. No one wanted to hear it.
But everyone was thinking about it. What if the dead were the only source of food left? Silence fell over the group because everyone knew the answer and everyone hated it. But nature offered no mercy. Starvation offered no alternative. According to the testimony of survivors, the decision was not taken lightly. There was no celebration, no joy, only shame, guilt,
and the basic human instinct to survive. They cried. They prayed. Some couldn't bear to see, but in the end, some of them did what they believed was necessary to survive. That event will be one of the reasons. The Donner Party is remembered to this day, not because of the crime.
Not because of the cruelty, but because of the extreme circumstances that forced humanity to confront its most terrifying moral limits. Meanwhile, at the main camp, the situation was no less dire. The people left behind were still trapped in simple wooden huts. They didn't know what had happened to the rescue party.
They didn't know if help was on the way, or if all hope was lost. All they knew was one thing. Every day someone was closer to death, and winter was far from over. The nights grew quieter, because fewer and fewer people had the energy to speak. A small fire in the center of the room was the only source of comfort. People sat around it, silence, staring at the red embers, thinking of family, thinking of home.
Thinking of the life they once had, a life that now felt like a dream. But far away in those frozen mountains, a small miracle was beginning to happen. A few remaining members of the Forlorn Hope were still alive, and they were getting closer to help. They didn't know it yet, but the terrible decisions they made
would be the reason some of the Donner Party finally had a chance to survive. And that chance would trigger the next chapter of this tragedy. A chapter that would test courage, sacrifice, and humanity in a way never before seen.
Somewhere beyond the Sierra Nevada mountains, several emaciated figures hobbled along. They barely looked human. Their clothes were tattered, their faces were sunken, their skin was frozen and cracked. Their eyes were blank. It was as if all life had been drained from their body, but they kept moving.
Step by step, because they knew one thing. If they stopped, they would die. When the small remaining group of Forlorn Hope was finally found by locals in California, the witnesses could hardly believe what they saw. They saw people on the verge of death, people who had endured unimaginable suffering.
And as their stories began to unfold, fear spread quickly. Dozens of men, women, and children were still trapped in the mountains. Family members were still waiting. There were still people who might only have days to live. Time was their greatest enemy. Every hour that passed meant more lives were in danger. So a rescue mission was immediately formed. Volunteers gathered supplies.
Prepared for the journey, and prepared for terrain that even experienced hunters feared. They knew the risks. They knew the storm was still raging. But they also knew something more important. If no one left now, there would be no one left to save.
At the Donner camp, conditions had reached an almost unimaginable point. Hunger was now a part of everyday life. Many were too weak to stand. Some couldn't even get out of bed. Their bodies were slowly consuming themselves. Muscles were disappearing. Strength was disappearing. Hope was disappearing.
Children who once played around the wagons now lay silently. Mothers tried to keep them warm, whispering words of comfort, even though they themselves no longer believed in the future. Some wrote notes, some prayed, some simply waited, waiting for something that might never come. Then one morning,
someone saw something in the distance. Small figures moving across the snow. It was hard to believe at first. Maybe it was an illusion. Maybe it was just hope creating shadows. But the figures grew closer and getting closer.
Until finally the truth became clear. Help had arrived.
The first rescue team arrived in February 1847. What they found left them speechless. The small huts were filled with people who were almost shadows of themselves, faces filled with suffering. Bodies that are just bones and skin. Children who are too weak to smile. Even the rescuers who had heard the horrific stories before were unprepared for the reality. Some cried.
Some were speechless, because there are not enough words to describe what they saw. Food was distributed immediately. But a new problem arose. They couldn't take everyone at once. Limited supplies. Traveling is too dangerous. Difficult decisions have to be made. Who goes first?
And who should stay? Imagine that pain after months of waiting for help, after going through hell. Now, safety is in sight. But not everyone can participate. Some mothers hugged their children for the last time. They chose to send the children first. Hope one day we can meet again. Some adults stayed behind, not because I want to,
but because there is no choice. And when the first group left the camp, not all separations end happily. Many will never see each other again.
The journey out of the mountains remained deadly. The snow was still deep. The storm was still fierce. Even with the help of rescuers, some died along the way. Their bodies were too weak. Months of suffering had left wounds beyond repair. But some made it to California.
And when they arrived, their story shocked the nation. Newspapers began reporting what people read in horror. How could an ordinary family experience such a tragedy? How could a journey of hope turn into a nightmare? And the most terrifying question of all, what really happened in those mountains?
But the tragedy wasn't over. There were still people left behind. There were still families trapped. So a second rescue team was sent, then a third, then a fourth. Every journey became a race against time, and time almost always won. One of those still trapped was George Donner, the man whose name would become associated with this entire tragedy. He had suffered serious injuries along the way.
The injuries worsened, his body weakened. When help finally approached, George knew he might not survive. He could try to leave, but that would have slowed everyone down. It would have endangered his family. It would have endangered the rescuers. According to various historical accounts, he chose to stay.
It was an incredibly difficult choice. The choice of a man who understood reality and in the frozen forest. George Donner faced his final days far from home, far from the dream he was chasing, far from the future he had ever imagined.
The wave of rescues continues, little by little. The remaining victims were successfully evacuated. Some walk alone. Some have to be carried. Some were barely conscious. But they move towards life, towards the end of a nightmare that had lasted for months. When the final rescue is complete,
more than half of the group never made it out of the mountains alive. They were left under the snow, become part of dark history. But for those who survived, the real struggle has just begun. Because there are wounds that are not visible, wounds that food cannot heal, or warmth, or time.
wounds they will carry throughout their lives. Memories of lost people, memories of choices that had to be made, memories of the winter that changed everything. And when the snow finally melts, Sierra Nevada begins to reveal secrets that have been hidden for months, secrets that will make the Donner Party tragedy remembered as one of the most harrowing survival stories in American history.
But the biggest question still remains. Did the survivors really manage to leave the mountains? Or will some of them remain trapped there for the rest of their lives in their own memories? Winter was finally over. The snow was beginning to melt, the winds that had brought death for months were slowly subsiding. The Sierra Nevada mountains were silent again, but beneath that silence hid the traces of one of the most horrific tragedies in American history. To the outside world, the story of the Donner Party was over. To the survivors, it was just beginning. When the survivors arrived in California, they were greeted as survivors, but there was no celebration. There was no triumph. There was no complete joy. Their bodies were safe, but their minds were still trapped in the mountains. Many of them had nightmares. Over and over again, they saw the snow again.
Heard the wind again, feeling the gnawing hunger again. Some woke up in the middle of the night, sweating to shaking, as if the winter had never ended. The rescued children carried even deeper wounds. They lost their parents. They lost their siblings.
They lost their childhoods. Some grew up with memories that never truly went away, because there are things humans cannot forget, no matter how hard they try. Meanwhile, news of the Donner Party tragedy spread across America. Newspapers carried story after story. Each report sparked curiosity and horror. People wanted to know what happened. They wanted to know how an ordinary family could have fallen into such a terrible situation.
But one topic dominated them all: cannibalism. The word came up again and again. It shocked many, angry, even disgusted. But the reality was far more complicated than many imagined. It's easy to judge someone when you have a full stomach. It's easy to talk about morals when you're sitting comfortably in a warm home.
But what if the only choices were to cross a line you never intended to cross? Or die? That question makes the Donner Party tragedy so disturbing. Because there are no simple answers. There are no perfect heroes. There are no absolute villains. Just human beings. Humans pushed to the extreme limits.
When the search team returned to the campsite months later, they found the remains of the tragedy. Empty huts, abandoned belongings, and evidence confirming the utter desperation of the situation. For some, the discovery ended speculation. For others, it only opened more questions.
But one fact was undeniable. The famine had changed everything. The famine had forced ordinary people to face extraordinary decisions. Decisions they might never have imagined when they began their journey to California. Then another question arises. Who is to blame? Was it nature? Was it fate? Or did this tragedy actually begin long before the first snow fell? Many historians believe this disaster was born of a series of bad decisions.
The decision to take an untested shortcut. The decision to press ahead despite time running out. The decision to ignore warnings. There was no single mistake that caused this tragedy. It was many small mistakes piled up little by little, until it became a major disaster.
And perhaps that's the most frightening lesson, because in real life, destruction rarely comes all at once. It often comes through small, seemingly innocuous decisions.
But amidst all the suffering, there was something extraordinary. Courage behind the stories of death. There were stories of sacrifice. Parents who gave their food rations to their children, brothers who kept their brothers alive, rescuers who risked their lives to weather the storm, and people who chose to help others, even when they were near death themselves.
The Donner Party tragedy is not just a story about the dark side of humanity. It is also a story of human resilience, about the ability to keep going when hope is lost, about the courage to endure one more day, and then another day, and another day.
To this day, more than a century and a half has passed, but the name of the Donner Party is still remembered. Books have been written about them, documents have been made about them. Historians continue to study their story. Not because of the sensationalism, not simply because of the cannibalism, but because this tragedy forces us to confront uncomfortable questions.
What would we do in a similar situation? How strong are our principles when our lives are at stake? How far are humans willing to go to survive? And most importantly, do we truly know ourselves before we are tested by extreme circumstances? Imagine, for a moment, you're standing in the middle of the Sierra Nevada mountains. In the winter of 1846, there's no escape, no food, no certainty, just snow, just cold, just hunger, slowly eroding everything.
What would you do? No one can answer that question with certainty. And perhaps that's why the story of the Donner Party lives on, because beneath all the horror, this story isn't just about them. This story is also about us, about human nature, about hope, about fear, about limits we may never want to cross.
In the end, about half of the Donner Party never reached their destination. Their dreams were buried in the snows of the Sierra Nevada. But those who survived carried with them stories that would endure far longer than their own lives. A reminder that nature can be a cruel enemy, that small decisions can change destiny, and that even in the darkest of circumstances,
humans are capable of showing both their best and their most terrifying sides. Because sometimes, the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones lurking in the woods, but the circumstances that force humans to choose between morality or survival. And when the last snow melted, all that remained was a question, not what the Donner Party did, but what we would do in their place.
In your opinion, do the members of the Donner Party deserve to be judged for their decisions, or were they simply victims of impossible circumstances? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
And if you enjoy true historical stories filled with mystery, tragedy, and profound life lessons, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because there are many more incredible stories waiting to be uncovered together. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next documentary.